This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.
Okay.
That's the organisation there.
Agenda item 2. Have we any apologies? We have one apology from Joanne Dobson. Any other apologies? Okay. Agenda item 3. Chairperson's business. Can I refer members to the note of the committee visit to Scotland on pages 25 to 31? Based on what we heard on the visit, can I seek agreement to request that DART presents to the committee in early 2015 on the business improvement scheme? Do any other members wish to attend the visit, have anything to say on the visit? Any other members? Okay. I think from a chairperson's point of view, I think it's a worthwhile visit, and a number of issues that were discussed, and they are all documented here, and it will be of benefit to us, I think, at a later date. Members content to note the visit report? Okay.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Members, we called last week the possibility of a joint stakeholder event with the EDI committee on Going for Growth was raised, I think, by Tom Elliott. The clerk has checked, and the EDI committee have no plans to do anything about this. Before we go any further, can I seek clarification on the purpose of the event and what is anticipated outcome?
Chair, I suppose I just raised it in the sense that it might have been useful because it's a cross-departmental policy, that maybe the two committees should have been working slightly closer together on it, and that if we would have had one stakeholder event, that may have been able to get us to establish from stakeholders both in the, I suppose, the agri-food sector and the agricultural sector both, to get each other's views, because quite often there's little crossover between the actual processing sector, well, mainly the processing retail sector of agri-food and the frontline producers, which is the farmers.
Okay, members.
That is just the reason. There's no agenda, Chair.
Okay.
Chairman, I can see some merit in the case, but given that processors are largely within the dairy remit, and given that, for example, the dairy processors at the moment have quite strong opinions about how their sector of the industry should develop going forward. If you take the Ballyrashane, Dale Farms, the Fane Valleys, and the others at the moment that are going to be dealing in high volume milk from here on, there's a whole question about the opening up of the milk powder market into China, and this is where there is high value added potential, but that may be too narrow a remit for it, I don't know. But I can see that there's some merit, given that the two departments have co-responsibility for the Going for Growth.
Okay, any other members?
Would there be any idea of a theme, what you hope to get out of it?
Yeah,
just a general discussion, or is it specific issues, or?
Well, I suppose what my issue always is the balance between the agri-food sector, really the processors and retailers, compared to the primary producers. Where that balance is, where the most of the focus is. So it would, we hear from the primary producers' point of view, Eddie here from the processors' point of view, and I'd just like to get them both all in one room so they can hear each other.
Obviously,
single supply chain then, is that really the single supply chain? Okay.
Obviously, Going for Growth, and there's upwards of 250 million pumped going to be put into the primary producer sector. There obviously is a big degree of support going to the primary producer.
Yep.
Yeah.
So do you want me to move ahead with this?
Any one of the members happy enough?
Well, I think just it'd be useful to take the view of the EDI committee. Oh, look, if they're not keen on doing it.
See what the
Yeah.
Is it? Take the view, take the view. That's okay. Okay. Can I advise members of the department as advised that the presentation on the draft budget 2015-16 due on the 18th of November will be postponed as the budget consultation document will not be ready in time. The meeting on the 25th of November has been cancelled due to the consideration stage of the Reservoirs Bill. The next meeting of the committee where the budget could be considered will be the 2nd of December. However, the committee will be expected to report to the Committee of Finance and Personnel on the 2nd of December. Can I suggest that we schedule an additional meeting on Monday the 24th of November at 12 noon to receive the budget presentation if the department is unable to make the 18th? Are there any other witnesses that members want to hear from on the same day?
What time, sorry,
Do
Chair? Beg pardon, 24th of November?
Monday the 24th of November, yeah.
What time?
Suggested. 12 noon. Which is... Okay. Everyone happy now?
Nobody else you want to hear from?
No.
Okay.
Item agenda 4, minutes of the meeting of 4th of November 2014. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of the meeting on 4th of November 2014, pages 33 to 38? Are members content that the draft minutes are accurate? Okay, right. I will then sign. Okay. Agenda item 5, matters arising. Can I refer members to the matters arising at pages 41 to 43? Or members content the actual matters arising as suggested on the index sheet at page 40? We're getting an oral briefing under agenda. We're moving to agenda item 7, oral briefing from Rural Development Council, as they've been waiting for some time. And then we'll go back to the Department on the Reservoirs Bill after this presentation. I refer members to the memo from the clerk at page 46 to 48, and the briefing paper from Rural Development Council at pages 49 to 51. Can I welcome Teresa Kavanagh, Chief Executive, Orla Gallagher, Director of Programmes, and Michael Kelly, Director of Operations. You're all welcome. And I give you up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and then we can ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members, for this opportunity to attend, and indeed for ensuring that rural poverty and social isolation remains very much part of the agenda. We're going to collectively present and obviously do our very best to keep within the time frame presented and within the context of our briefing submitted, but we will want to elaborate on some key points. I will cover the introduction and general comments in relation to the DARD Tackling Rural Poverty and Social Isolation Programme, TRIPSI as it's more internally referred to, and invite Michael and Olga to comment specifically on some of the approaches and work in this area. We'll want to conclude with ideas and recommendations for the future, and we'll collectively respond to any questions you have at the end. I suppose I just wanted to start really by declaring at the outset the RDC's involvement in the DARD TRIPSI programme as follows. We contributed to the development of the original framework, and I suppose looking back at that framework, it confirmed a number of key things. That rural poverty and social isolation do exist. This may seem like an obvious finding, however quite often the rural make-do culture and perception can lead people to think that it doesn't actually exist. That rural living is different from urban living, and policymakers need to understand how rural works in order to better target resources. The gap between those who have and those who have not is getting bigger, and issues of access and lack of information and awareness about what is available is a key barrier, and I suppose this is why collaboration and joint working are so important. Higher costs of living, especially with the need to have a car in rural areas, reduces the disposable income. And some other key indicators that were available at that time: 33% of pensioners living in rural households are experiencing income poverty, in comparison to 12% in Belfast and 10% in urban areas. Transport enabling access to services remains a key issue for rural people. Only 20% of rural households at that time were within 13 miles of a bus stop. Fuel poverty is a much greater problem in Northern Ireland than in the rest of the UK. More rural households experience fuel poverty than urban households, and this can be due to a number of reasons. Fuel choices obviously being one, age and condition of rural properties. We were also involved in the delivery of best practice workshops for the Rural Challenge programme in partnership with the Rural Community Network. Rural Challenge being a small grants initiative designed to target those most in need and isolated, and to date there have been 2 rounds which have implemented, and Michael will touch on the approach taken in helping to reach communities, individuals most in need shortly. We're currently engaged in a Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Programme, which is funded through the programme and is specifically designed to support opportunities for youth enterprise as a means of tackling unemployment and migration, and Olga will touch on that. I suppose finally we work in collaboration with those involved in other aspects of the programme, such as the farm health checks, providing a referral process into the Farm Safe Awareness Programme. And although these are 2 separate initiatives, the Farm Safe Awareness Programme is funded under the Rural Development Programme, and it's not specifically designed to focus on poverty. But this collaborative approach, which underpins our work, helps to ensure that those most isolated have access to this important farm safe message. Similarly, we work in collaboration with MARA, ensuring services are promoted to those most in need. For example, we are currently running ICT training courses for farmers and farm families, and we work with MARA to ensure this information reaches those most isolated. These are just some of the current areas that we're engaged in, and I suppose for us we see our role as working to support the development of locally based solutions to tackling the issues. As an organisation, we no longer receive core funding towards any research or policy functions, and as such our interventions are focused on how we can address rural need by designing and delivering rural projects and presenting these to the relevant funding bodies. We see our role as translating the challenges into practical actions on the ground. And just in terms of some general comments in relation to the DARD programme, we would start by firstly welcoming the programme and commend DARD for their approach to implementation, which is largely focused on partnership, working, collaboration, and most importantly for us, engaging rural stakeholders and communities. We believe strongly that the practical engagement of local people and communities in projects such as MARA have made the difference. We would very much doubt the same results could have been achieved without the community connections, and believe strongly that this is an approach that can and could be adopted in the delivery of schemes right across government. I think it's also important to recognise the distinctions between poverty and social isolation. Whilst you can find situations of both, they are not mutually exclusive, and you could have a vulnerable person living in a relatively affluent area. Indeed, they themselves could, for example, own their own home, have land, but they still find themselves to experience social isolation, loneliness, and becoming unattached from society. The benefits of the programme was its dual approach in recognising the need to tackle and address both isolation and poverty. Social isolation by its very nature is more likely to manifest itself in rural areas given the limitation of services, including lack of access of public transport, and by targeting social isolation as well as tackling poverty, the programme has had relative success in reaching those most in need. Michael's going to now touch on some of the approaches that we've adopted in relation to the Rural Challenge programme and also in relation to rural youth entrepreneurship.
Thank you. Our engagement in the Rural Challenge workshops and indeed our implementation of RAI has shown the value of outreach and engagement in addressing challenges and the importance of investing in the proactive targeting of actions and in investment in locating those most in need rather than simply inviting applications for funding, which can tend to favour stronger groups with more capacity and perhaps don't always target the most vulnerable. We have seen clearly the benefits of development support and helping groups and communities to engage in projects. A grant in itself is not always the answer, but supporting, nurturing and encouraging communities to engage in addressing real community need is money well invested. We recognise the benefits of using a flexible approach in the delivery of services in rural areas, and that we recognise that a one-size-fits doesn't fit work always the best. Different areas present different challenges. Similarly, different sectors, groups and individuals will present different issues, and the Rural Challenge programme, I'll bet even if it was done through small grants, it targeted specific identified sectors, individuals and groupings, and thus ensured it wasn't a one-size-fits-all, but a recognition of different rural circumstances and the communities within it. This is something we feel other government departments could take on board. I think the advantage of having a compulsory workshop as part of the programme meant that all those organisations thinking of applying had access to the same consistent message and were actively encouraged to demonstrate how even with a small investment they could target their sectors. It also recognised it wasn't all about size and numbers. Even the smallest interventions in reaching those most in need would be considered. I think it's also important in considering approaches. Quite often funding programmes focus on numbers, and if you want to tackle rural poverty and social isolation, you have to invest in the approach and simply not just count the numbers at the end. We all want to see value for money, that is a given, but within a rural context it shouldn't simply be about dividing the amount of money allocated into the number of people participating. Locating that one person in a rural area most in need may take twice the time and effort as it would in an urban area, and this is something that we're keen to ensure that government departments and others are aware of.
Okay, Olga's going to now outline a wee bit more on the RIE project, which is the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship.
Thank you. The RIE programme aims to contribute to rural social and economic development by stimulating latent entrepreneurial abilities among young people in rural Northern Ireland. The programme is addressing issues that lie at the heart of the Tackling Rural Poverty and Social Isolation framework, that is, deprivation, inequalities, poverty and social exclusion. The combined factors of multiple deprivations affecting rural young people, including cost of living, accessibility, high unemployment, low educational attainment and social isolation, pose particular challenges, and tackling these issues is a priority of RIE. RIE is a mechanism to target and support young people who live in rural deprived areas by creating opportunities through developing their entrepreneurial skills and ideas. This has been done through awareness raising, workshop participation, mentoring, development of business action plans and broadening their experience and skills by participating in a network of young rural entrepreneurs. RIE provides outreach workshops, mentoring, business plans and networking opportunities which will support the young people to address poverty and exclusion in a sustainable manner by giving them early business development skills. RIE aims to contribute to the elimination of poverty in rural areas by facilitating the development of business action plans. This creates the potential for vulnerable rural young people to start their own businesses, enter the employment market, develop new skills, ultimately contributing to creating active and sustainable rural communities and help address youth migration, which is currently high due to the economic downturn. By encouraging self-employment among rural youth, the project not only supports the participant in generating their own business idea and the future income arising from this, but also contributes to wider potential job creation and to income being retained and circulated within the local area as the local economy diversifies and grows. By engaging directly with young people from disadvantaged rural areas, the project contributes to the outcomes of tackling rural poverty and social isolation, as it contributes to addressing both poverty and social exclusion among this priority group in a way that will help participants to help themselves and contribute to improving the integration and economic sustainability of their rural communities. If we are to develop sustainable rural communities and economies, it is essential that the young in these communities do not leave, but instead have adequate support and opportunities for employment within their local area.
Okay, in coming to a conclusion, throughout our years of service we would identify some distinct characteristics that pose particular challenges for delivery in rural areas, and these include the difficulty in identifying need. The characteristics of rural social isolation means that deprivation indicators do not fully reflect the extent of the problem, and so rural areas often miss out in their share of funding from targeted programmes. There are a wide range of hidden issues in the countryside, such as seasonal or part-time incomes, unaffordable housing or limited choice, poor access to childcare, education and training, to name but a few. Other ways of measuring rural deprivation are needed, and we know obviously that you've heard from the Rural Community Network and the work that they're doing in this area, and we fully support this and the need to review the deprivation measures. The challenge of accessibility. Due to the scattered nature of settlements and to the sparsity of public transport in many rural areas, people are constrained in their ability to access the services they need. Access to services is the most fundamental distinguishing feature between rural and urban. New ways of delivering services and improving access is core to our work, and new and innovative ways of delivering to rural areas must be found. The challenges of scale, and Michael's already alluded to this in relation to many rural settlements have by definition smaller populations and therefore struggle to generate critical mass for specific services, leading to lower level of service provision. This raises the importance of shared, integrated and joined up approaches to service delivery in order to generate the necessary economies of scale. Whilst the sharing agenda often predominantly focuses on large urban settlements for community relations reasons, which is equally important in rural areas, opportunity exists in financial terms to promote shared rural services to provide more sustainable rural communities. We believe our work over the years in programmes such as the Vibrant Villages, developing rural service centre hubs, integrating community organisations and maximising community space have shown that how engaging communities in the provision of services locally can provide local solutions. And finally, you'll be glad to hear we appreciate other organisations have presented and no doubt similar issues on the challenges that have been communicated, not least in terms of the measurement of deprivation, rural proofing, the need for greater evidence base and the dynamics of rural to be better understood within and across all government departments, again part of the rural proofing agenda. These are all important and part of the foundation for change. We know that budget pressures will place increased pressure to prioritise funding. However, we strongly believe that the Tackling Rural Poverty and Social Isolation programme and the role and value it is making to address the combined challenges of poverty and social isolation is needed. Without this funding, we would ask what would be happening. Collaboration and working together obviously can support budgetary pressures, but the key remaining focus has to be on reaching those most in need, and that is a collective responsibility for all departments, not just START, in tackling the issues highlighted. Equally important are the ideas and options to address the challenges, and in that perspective we would like to conclude with a couple. We believe there is a need to have an option to retain small grants. These often provide a lifeline to communities and provide essential access to services locally. Even if it is the provision of a community office where people know where to go and how to access information, befriending services and working with local communities to ensure those most in need are identified. Our work with rural youth and our history of rural regeneration and economic development would lead us to consider the need for community-supported employment schemes. Not wanting to look back with rose-tinted glasses or to show our ages, I suppose, but the old ACE scheme provided much-needed local employment and training opportunities, including support for local services at a time not dissimilar to now. In fact, many rural development initiatives grew out of these schemes, and many that continue today, like the Locheels and the Kinturks of this world. For us, it is about finding ways of translating the policy into practical, tangible actions on the ground, and this can only be done with the continued financial support combined with the enthusiasm and commitment of local people. Just on that note, we've just started the process of forming new local action groups in support of the new Rural Development Programme, which also has a role in tackling poverty. And we held our first meetings last night with well over 100 people turning out. I think we believe if we can harness their motivation and interest in developing their areas and work with local and central government, then collectively we can address the problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. In your briefing, you note that the Rural Challenge Fund and the RIE projects have been extremely successful. Can you outline why you think this is so, and are there any key lessons from these two projects that can be carried forward?
I think for us, it has to be the outreach and targeting. Gone are the days where you put an advertisement in paper and you open a programme and you expect people to come. If you're going to address rural poverty and social isolation, you have to target local communities. You have to work with communities and identify those most in need. Both of those programmes had an outreach element. The Rural Challenge programme had a compulsory workshop where people came along, heard about the programme, heard about the initiatives, but most importantly, they learned or they shared practice on how you can engage communities and how you can get the best out of a small grant. The RIE programme is very much based around outreach work and specific targeting, and I think that approach has to be embedded in future programmes. And I suppose from our perspective, quite often that can mean that the programme may cost a little bit more, but as we've already highlighted, you can't have the same economies of scales when you're dealing with rural populations that are scattered as compared to urban areas.
Okay, can you give us an example of an ACIL project that demonstrates the success you've talked about? Pardon? Could you give us an example of an ACIL project that demonstrates the successes that you're talking about?
Well, in terms of the Rural Challenge programme, there was a wide range of projects, small grants. They could have been around befriending services. They could have been provision of Meals on Wheels or luncheon clubs within community halls. So there was a wide range of services. I think there was other financial services available, debt management, those types of initiatives delivered locally within local community centres where people felt comfortable to come and access them. So there was a wide range of activities, but small projects, small amounts of money that made a huge difference.
Okay. Declan McAleer.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a question about And all of us MLAs in here represent rural areas. Some of the areas are very, very isolated, and there's very, very few services in those areas, and there's either none or else a very, very weak community infrastructure there. How successful is DARD, or how can you actually get into those communities to actually identify people who are vulnerable or who are facing social isolation?
I think in that regard, the Mara project is probably a good example where the programme put in place local enablers, those people with the local knowledge to identify those most vulnerable. For us, our mantra is that local people are best placed to identify local solutions, and if you can find a mechanism of connecting the communities in those processes, well then you're more likely to be able to access those most in need. So I think the Mara project, in terms of having those local enablers, is one of the key successes of how to reach those most in need.
Treasurer, what other organisations would yourselves work with in terms of trying to probe into those hard to reach communities?
Yeah, well, I suppose we would work very closely with all the organisations within what we would call the rural family. So you have the rural support, you have the rural community network, you have the rural support networks, and you have NIRWIN. And collectively we would work very closely together to ensure that any initiatives or programmes or funding that comes available, that we can work together to ensure that it reaches those most in need.
You mentioned about the lags and the rural development. Is there opportunities within the rural development programme, do you think, to address some of the objectives of TRIPSEC?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for us, the new model of Delivering Leader, which has a wider local action group membership, which is really about trying to get as many people involved in the process as possible, provides the best opportunity to tackle poverty. I think the range of measures within Priority 6, which includes things like rural services, rural broadband, village renewal, all of those have huge potential in terms of delivering services and reaching those most in need. I think the key challenge will be whenever it comes to developing the strategies. Obviously there's a limited budget and we have to manage the expectations, but I think the key thing will be to align the local needs to the funding priorities, but I think it's achievable.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Sidney Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And
Thanks, Sidney.
thank you, Teresa and Olga. But it's good to see you again.
Yes, absolutely.
Spent some years down to RDC, as you're well aware, and certainly I do know the good work that you do down in Cookstown. I want to touch on the difficulties associated in measuring rural poverty. It's a big issue, and we've asked others, and different ones who have come in here. But what more do you think can be done? We keep going back to the fact that rural dwellers and rural people by nature are laid-back people, and I'm a rural dweller myself, and they say it's difficult maybe to get the information that you need for those people who would qualify for a lot of help, and they're not maybe very forward in coming with information. How do you work together as a rural family, Teresa, as you call it, to try and tap into that information? To try and get it together.
Yeah, well, I suppose just in relation to the measuring deprivation, I mean, I think we all see the challenges in that in relation to, particularly if you use multiple deprivation measures, which bring together a range of domains, which basically skew I suppose the funding or whatever to more urban centres because they're for higher populations and they demonstrate higher needs in terms of the deprivation indices. I think if you were to separate those out and look at access to services, you get a different picture. You would get more rural communities coming forward in terms of deprivation against access to services. So there are key ways in which, if you're looking at measuring, isolation, that if you focus in on some of the indices that are more relevant, that you would get a different picture. I suppose in terms of ways that we are working together, I mean, ourselves in the Rural Community Network designed and delivered the Rural Challenge workshops, and that was a project that we delivered in partnership. We have over the years also delivered the Development Rural Service Centre Hubs project, which was designed to look at new ways of delivering services in rural areas. So whatever opportunity we can to identify ways of coming together to bring practical solutions to communities, we will try and do that. We also collaborate strongly with Rural Support. Obviously they have their helpline and they work directly with the farming community. RDC in more recent years has developed a relationship mentorship and programmes with the farm sector, and we deliver farm safe awareness and ICT training to the farm family, and we work very closely with rural support and ensuring that those services and those programmes reach those most in need. So it really is about collaboration, signposting, I suppose being able to share each other's information. If we are aware of somebody that's in financial stress, we can signpost them over to rural support and so forth. So you know, we feel that we work very well together, and it's about sharing that information and making those connections. And obviously from our point of view, anybody that contacts us, we want to be able to give them the right information and be able to signpost them quickly.
You have touched on the new LAGs, the new rural programme. Are you finding the willingness there? And I think, did you touch on some meeting you had recently?
Yeah.
Right, okay. That there is a willingness there within the rural community now to come forward and really get involved here to...
We've only started the process. The first public meeting was last night, and we have another one tonight. In fact, there will be nearly 50 public meetings right across Northern Ireland to try and engage people in a wider LAG membership. This time round, you will have a wider LAG membership plus a LAG board. Those members then can get involved in some more networking activities and cooperation and to support the work of the board. And we were pleasantly surprised. We had over 100 people turned out, and people seemed genuinely interested in the programme and in playing their part in developing their strategy for the local area. So we're very encouraged to date, and I think we feel that model has gone back more in line with the leader principles about engaging and mobilising local people to take the decisions, and it puts in place a bit of accountability back between the board and the community, because ultimately the membership will have a say in who represents their area on the board.
Okay, thank you very much, and good to see you. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Some of this might well be touched on, but the delivery of services in the rural areas, we all know, is always challenging and difficult because of the rural nature of it and all that type of thing. Do you think the right approach has been taken, or does that need to change?
I suppose our experience would suggest that you can find new ways of delivering services, and quite often I suppose we would feel that some service providers would think it's all or nothing. You either provide the service as a fixed service and it's whatever the opening hours are, whatever, you provide it that way. And then whenever there becomes budgetary difficulties, the solution is to remove the full service. I think we have seen over the last number of years, and particularly with the Developing Rural Service Centre programme, that you can find new ways of delivering for rural communities. You can look at joined up services, you can look at, we had a couple of projects where the post office moved into the local community centre. Maybe there's another one where the post office moved into the pharmacist. We delivered a rural retail support programme, which was about trying to retain retail services locally in villages and in communities. And that sometimes meant sharing services. It meant maybe changing opening hours. So I think there are different ways. You can have mobile services. Obviously with improved broadband, and we know and appreciate that not everybody can access broadband, but with the continued development in that area, then that brings with it new ways again of developing services. The other thing that we were involved in was the Maximising Community Halls programme, which is essentially working with communities that owned or managed halls within the area, and how those communities could open those halls up for greater services. I suppose we would like to see more work done around schools and other community buildings to ensure that they can also be opened up for service provision. But I think the days of assuming that rural people come to expect the service to remain the same, I think there is a realisation in rural communities that services need to change, and I think if you work with communities you can find a solution as opposed to the immediate one, withdrawal, and I think that would be where we wouldn't want to go. It would be more about trying to find a solution, should that be changing hours or changing the way it's delivered.
With regard to rural broadband, and we know that there are some areas that's extremely difficult to get covered. West Tyrone, there's a number of issues there, black spots and that type of thing. Would you find that would be one of the biggest challenges that you would have in delivery terms in getting broadband into those areas, or are there other more severe or bigger challenges that you're facing?
I mean, I think it's certainly one of the challenges. I mean, obviously not everybody necessarily wants to have broadband or use it, you know, so I think there is that as well. But certainly it's one of the challenges. I mean, the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Programme that we're delivering has an online tool and, you know, young people being able to access that. And we have seen where there are, you know, not spots or where people can't access it, that does present challenges in being able to deliver that service. So it's one of the challenges. I wouldn't say it's the only, because as I say, not everybody is comfortable or confident enough in actually using online services. And whilst we're delivering a programme at the moment which is to support the farm family to access online services, and we're seeing huge uptake on that, we appreciate that not everybody will want to do that, and there has to be alternative mechanisms and alternative ways to access those people.
Okay.
Okay. Ciaran McCarthy.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. During your presentation, you mentioned the word ACE. I thought that you had been too young to remember ACE.
I just vaguely remember it.
Because I know it was a fantastic scheme at the time and lasted well. I don't know why or whoever was responsible for doing it, but there surely was something replaced at that time to replace ACE. Is there nothing at this moment in time, certainly in our area, there's nothing comparable to what ACE performed?
Yeah. No, well, certainly we're not aware of something that's comparable. I mean, I suppose we were looking back on it in relation to not only the fact that it provided local employment, but it was the fact that it connected to communities. And, you know, quite often if you look around the countryside, you know, the number of community halls or facilities that might have been built through ACE schemes, the number of people that have been supported to stay in their homes, you know, just because there was ACE services provided and caring services. So I suppose we're looking at it more in that context, and we don't see anything comparable at the moment in terms of providing that opportunity for communities to, I suppose, work together in some sort of supported employment and provide those services locally. And I think we feel there is opportunity, particularly you know, in tackling some of the youth unemployment and just unemployment in general, but also in the provision of services.
I'm surprised because we do have a very young, energetic Dáil minister that likes to be helping in those areas, and you know, is there nothing that he has provided through the Dáil department? I know the budgets is cut and all the rest of it now, but up until now, is there nothing? There
has been other like youth employment schemes, but nothing on that nature where it's about actually delivering services in the local area. I mean, I suppose for us what we see is that there's a wealth of community infrastructure in communities. All of those buildings have to be maintained, all of them have to be serviced, all of them have to be looked after, and if there's some way of engaging local communities in encouraging the maintenance of those, well, that helps the sustainability of the community. So I think that whilst there may be other schemes and apprenticeships and things like that, it's not necessarily targeted around the rural specific area, and keeping employment local and encouraging people to get engaged in community activities.
Yeah, thanks very much. Keep up the good work, that's what I can say. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Joe Byrne.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, I welcome the presentation and appreciate what the RDC has done. I suspect, though, that you're going to go through a review of types of functions and roles you can fulfill in the future. Bear in mind the Autonomy to RAI and the Rural Challenge Programme. What can RDC do to help and enable social economy projects develop, particularly to involve young enterprising people? Okay, well, I suppose we would see ourselves as a social enterprise in the first instance. It was something that we would certainly be promoting. Historically, we, as a grant funder or delivery of the Rural Development Programme, would have focused fairly closely in developing social enterprise, and I suppose have put in place a range of projects and programmes around building people's capacity and community capacity to deliver social enterprise projects. So we would see that that opportunity still exists for us to support communities and engage in them in looking at how they can, I suppose, come up with ideas, prepare business plans, feasibility studies, and then to identify and source funding.
Yes, I accept that. Given the challenge of ours trying to keep rural communities alive, they don't involve the younger people at an earlier stage in getting involved in some sort of employment creation or social economic projects with enablement and support from statutory agencies of yours. And I see
I'd like that feature for them. So I'm throwing it out, can you be more challenging and can you be more innovative in the approach that you could take?
Yeah, well, I suppose within the RIE project, obviously it's very much focused on engaging young people, and we are looking at how we can network and bring those young people together in support of all our initiatives. I mean, young people is one of the key I suppose, targets under the new rural development programme to try and engage, and historically it has been difficult. And we have done some research around how to engage young people, particularly in rural development, and believe that we can put some of those forward in the new Leader programme. You know, obviously, young people maybe necessarily don't want to move into committees and structures immediately. So what we want to try and do within the new rural development programme is to invite their participation in building their capacity through thematic activities and engaging them in projects which are time bound, which have specific outcomes and which help support their development in the future. So it is challenging. I mean, I think we know that they're a hard to reach group. But through targeted and outreach work, we can see that they're coming on board. I don't know, Olga, if you want to add for RIE.
Actually, sometimes we find once you engage with the youth and get their interest, they're highly motivated and they will have that drive and enthusiasm, but it's that initial getting their interest and getting the catch, you know, to get them involved. And we have found things like establishing a youth steering group where they feel that they're inputting into the process and helping shape the design of workshops and networking activities, etc., is one way to maintain that involvement without them feeling they're becoming involved maybe in a heavy duty board with, you know, external obligations. They're able to feed in their ideas for what can be improved and what would work and what would interest their own peers. And we found that's been working very well, but I think it's key, once you can get their interest, they will actually get involved.
That's fine, Chairman.
Okay, Tom Elliott.
Chair, thanks very much for the presentation, folks. There's quite a number of issues. I'll try to refine it to one or two. One is around what you said, I think, earlier, Teresa. Funding just isn't everything. There's more to it than that. And providing, I suppose, a support mechanism is one opportunity, providing employment is another. Where do you see the main focus, though? Are there any priorities in the sense of rural? Should it be employment? Should it be trying to keep younger people in the area? Should it be access to services? Something where you see the priorities?
Okay, I mean, I suppose from our perspective as an organisation that focuses on rural regeneration, we've always had an economic outlook, and it was about trying to support and sustain services, but through doing that, create employment locally. And that's been embedded within us, I suppose, since we started back in 1991. So I suppose we would always see local employment as a key driver to addressing poverty in rural communities, and would like to see that continue to be supported. I suppose we also see that can be through social enterprise, which is about engaging communities in that process. It's not all, you know, about solely about creating private sector businesses. It's also about building a strong social enterprise. So I think employment always will be there, but the service delivery and the models of ensuring that communities can access the services is also equally important. I think in terms of the point about funding not being everything, I think we have found over the years that, you know, it's easy to put out a call for application, get applications in, and then, you know, give a group funding. But if they're not supported through those processes, help to build their capacity, you know, there's more chance that they will fail in their outcomes. So we would tend to, in any programmes that we deliver or design, that there is always a developmental support element, that the group will get that, I suppose, required support throughout its implementation. And sometimes that can be as simple as helping with procurement issues or helping, you know, in terms of appointing an architect or things like that. But practical things that will enable the project to happen. And I think for us, where sometimes programmes fail is that when groups are just, you know, provided with the funding but no support. And I think they have to be joined up and they have to be integral. You can't really do one without the other.
Yeah. If you were to point to three areas in the rural community that should be priorities, what would you point to?
As in geographic locations?
No, not in geographic locations. No.
I was getting worried there.
No, in terms of facilitation, services, employment, further education, education itself.
It's a hard one to answer because, I mean, I think different priorities will result in different outcomes, and you know. But I mean, I still think economic development. I still think employment is a key requirement in rural areas, both in terms of sustaining those communities, helping to keep young people there, and helping to deliver service locally. But all those other, like education, outreach, all of those are important. Access to health. All of those things are equally important, so I don't think you can divorce one without the other, but I think that employment and having local employment options is key to sustaining the rural economy.
Would you see the older generation more disadvantaged in the rural areas than the younger generation, or vice versa?
Again, I think that's difficult, and I mean, Michael maybe alluded there that you know, different sectors and different individuals will have different set of issues, and there isn't a one size fits all. So it's very hard to determine whether young people who are more vulnerable or socially isolated than older people. I think they will present different challenges and different issues. So I'm afraid that there isn't a one answer to that. I mean, I think in terms of the Rural Challenge Fund, for example, DARD identified a number of sectors, including elderly, young people, lone parents, ethnic minorities, disabled. So they recognised that there's a whole group of different circumstances out there and a whole range of people that, you know, you need to support and tackle the isolation and poverty issues differently. So it's not a straightforward answer to that one. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Alderman McMullen.
Yes, Chair, can I apologise? One group there never seems to get any leeway at all, or any really big priority is the disability and special needs in the community. And this group in here is an integral part of our community. It's always a fight to get any services for them, any help for them, integration into youth clubs, whatever. How do they figure in your overall plan?
Well, I suppose they were a key sector within the Rural Challenge programme, and it was recognised that the people with disabilities living in rural areas, you know, are presented with different challenges, in particular in relation to access to services. I mean, obviously moving forward within the Rural Development Programme, there will be funding available which can support organisations working with those that are disabled as well. I think it is about connecting services. It's about looking at how communities can support those services, and perhaps looking at social enterprise as a mechanism to bring services into rural areas as well.
But surely we know all that beyond the programmes that we've run over the years, and still we haven't one programme, even two programmes out there for that particular sector of the community. And we're making a lot of the Rural Development Programme. And would you agree with me, we're putting the carts going before the horse here, because we haven't even got our community plans done. And I think it's a major fault that the community plan there wasn't a time frame put onto it. It's actually a voluntary basis, which I think is I thought totally wrong from the start. I can't see how this is going to be, the circle can be squared, so to speak. If we're running ahead with other programmes without a community plan made, and this group, the disabled special needs group, still haven't, nobody can give me one programme out there specifically tailored for their needs, other than lumping them in with a group in the community, or they can get the funding for them and they can do something. What?
Well, I mean, I suppose there is opportunity within the Rural Development Programme to look at how that sector gets involved, and obviously with the development of local strategies, we would hope that that comes forward within those. I mean, I think in relation to community planning, the idea is that obviously the Rural Development Programme and community planning in terms of strategy development will knit very neatly together, and they should do in terms of having the local action group and the leader methodology, which essentially is a community planning process but involving local people in the decision-making processes. So we would hope very clearly that as the community planning process evolves, that the rural development programme can knit in and fit into that, and that the strategy development can become part of, an integral part of, the community planning process. And through that, hopefully, the voices and the needs of different sectors, including those with disability, will come forward, and that there will be solutions found. But we're not, I suppose, aware of or working on any specific programmes which target only the disabled sector. But having said that, it was an identified grouping within the Rural Challenge programme, and it can be an identified grouping moving forward within rural services or within the Rural Development programme.
Just to finish, Chair, very quickly. Any parent out there, any group out there will tell you when a child leaves school at 19, there's nothing for them. So the yardstick's out there, and we still haven't been able to do anything about it. No matter what we say or do, there's not a programme out there for that. We're not even joining up with social services, the health boards or nothing else to deliver, and it's left down to community groups to do their own thing and trying to do something themselves. And I honestly do think that programmes like your own need to sit down and develop a clear and structured plan ahead for that particular grouping, and not leave it to individuals or other groups to devise a plan to apply for funding to the rural programme, for example, to get money in, and that's their programme. I think that they deserve a lot better than that. Thank you very much for that, anyway.
No, I was going to say, I think we certainly agree that the number of young people presenting themselves through the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Programme that really don't have or can't see an opportunity for, particularly just staying in the rural area, they can't see an opportunity for that. And I suppose we see the Rural Youth Entrepreneurship Programme as hopefully stimulating the idea that you can create a job, not just look for a job. So we're hoping that that can encourage people, young people, to create jobs. And I do go back to the ACE scheme type of idea where, you know, you can offer young people within an area an opportunity to engage in community type development.
Only the ACE scheme was back.
I know. We'll come back to you in a few years' time. So.
It'll come back maybe years.
We might have to reinvent a name or something, yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Can I thank you again for your presentation?
Thank you very much.
I apologise for the holding you back early on.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 4 to 22? And I also refer members to 2 further amendments from Rivers Agency in respect of clauses 120, which have been tabled at pages 14 and 15. Can I advise members the amendments are just for noting? No decision is required. They are also technical amendments with no substantial effect. They correct some drafting errors. Also tabled today is a revised list of the number of reservoirs and their designation. There are now 150 reservoirs. The previous designation list has also been amended to take into account of the allocation of 4 of the 6 unknown to owners, managers. Members may wish to ensure that they use the correct number of 150 reservoirs during the consideration stage debate. We're going to now hear from Rivers Agency officials on the potential impacts of the options. We have various potential options for the committee to discuss with Rivers Agency. Can I welcome Kieran Brazier and Mary Joan? Thank you for attending at short notice. I understand that the clerk has briefed you on why you're here today. The committee needs to make a decision on how it deals with the issues around the number of visits by a supervising engineer. And I understand you have a short presentation to make to us.
Yes.
Welcome to it.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're very pleased to be here and to contribute to your deliberations around that part of the bill that deals with the number of visits by a supervising engineer to controlled reservoir. We have been briefed in advance on the options that you have been considering, and if you allow me, I can go down through those and give you the department's position on each of those, and then we can take questions on that if you wish.
Yep.
Okay. We're very happy, by the way, to take any other questions on any other parts of the bill if you wish to take this opportunity as well. I'm going to take these in the order that the department would prefer that you take. That's not to say that that's the choice that you as a committee will make. The first one would come as no surprise to you, that the department would very much welcome if the committee accepted the amendments as proposed by the department, and that is to have for a high consequence reservoir a minimum of 1 visit in every 12-month period, for a medium consequence reservoir a minimum of 1 visit in every 36-month period, 3-year period. And just to remind the committee that low consequence reservoirs aren't required to be visited by a supervising engineer, and there's 30 low consequence reservoirs out of the 150. So we're talking about 120 reservoirs when we're talking about supervising engineer visits. So we would prefer that the committee accepted and supported the department's proposed amendment in that regard, which was made following consultation with the Institution of Civil Engineers. And while they and the department were, when we introduced the bill, just to remind the committee, the bill stated that there would be 2 visits to a high consequence reservoir in every 12-month period and 1 visit to a medium consequence reservoir in every 12-month period. It's important to understand the role of the supervising engineer in all of this, and then I'll explain where the Institution of Civil Engineers were coming from. That really a supervising engineer is on call at all times for a high and medium consequence reservoir, and he is the expert eyes and ears on that impoundment and that reservoir, and to give advice and guidance to the reservoir manager. The more familiar he becomes with that reservoir, or she becomes with that reservoir, the less visits he or she needs to make to that reservoir, and the more confidence he has in the reservoir manager's ability to report any concerns with the reservoir, would reduce the number of visits by a supervising engineer. The Institution of Civil Engineers were prepared to reduce the number on a medium consequence reservoir to 1 in every 3 years, but were reluctant to advise the department to go any further than that, simply because you would then reduce the familiarity with the reservoir. If a supervising engineer was only calling once every 3 years, it would, his familiarity with that reservoir would be significantly reduced. And we do appreciate that there are costs involved in all of this, and that, I know, is a huge issue for the committee. But it's my understanding that the charge made to a reservoir manager isn't necessarily based on the number of visits by a supervising engineer. It's based on the size of the reservoir, the complexity of the reservoir, the maintenance regime that has occurred before, and the condition of the reservoir. And it's my understanding that a charge would be given, say, for any 12-month period or 36-month period, and that charge wouldn't increase because, say, for example, there was an increased number of visits to that reservoir. But so that's why the department has moved to 1 in every 12-month period and 1 in every 36-month period. The second option that we were asked to consider was to omit the number of visits, reference to the number of visits in the reservoirs bill. And that can be accommodated. We could do that, and we would do that if you consider the Scottish, the equivalent bill in Scotland makes no reference to the number of supervising visits, and that's left to the reservoir manager and the supervising engineer to negotiate. The department, though, feels that putting an indicator in the bill as to the minimum number actually would help the reservoir manager. And the supervising engineer, there's an onus on the supervising engineer to explain to the reservoir manager why he would be calling and visit the reservoir more often than the minimum. If you don't have any minimum, then you have no baseline for that. So a supervising engineer, for example, who wanted to come to a high consequence reservoir more than once a year would need to explain that to the reservoir manager and justify that. Similarly, if he wanted to call more than one every 3 years to a medium consequence reservoir, he would have to do the same. So we felt that that was a good indicator of that. But as I say, if that would be the committee's preferred option, the department would be prepared to make that amendment on behalf of the committee, because there are, in almost every clause in the bill, it's linked to other clauses. There's other consequential amendments. And the technicalities of all of that, we would be best placed to make those amendments. So we're just making that offer to the committee if it wanted to take up that offer. In fact, any amendment that we would want to consider what those amendments were, but we would want to be as accommodating as we could in terms of drafting the bill so that an amendment wouldn't maybe compromise another part of the bill that... Okay. The third option that we were asked to consider was that the committee would come up with an alternative to all of this, to the number of visits. And I suppose this one could prove the most problematic, particularly if the committee were considering placing a limit on the number of visits to a reservoir. And we can understand why the committee might want to do that from a cost perspective, but that might be, in fact, a false economy. If you remember that what this is about is about keeping people safe from an uncontrolled release of water from a reservoir. And the supervising engineer is there to give expert advice and guidance to a reservoir manager and to call for an inspection and for maybe works to happen if he felt that that was appropriate. So placing a limit on that would be difficult and would prove unworkable. If the committee were to consider extending the period and frequency of visits, say, for example, for a medium consequence reservoir to 1 in every 5 years, again, that's doable. The department would make that amendment on your behalf, but reluctantly, for the reasons I've given previously, that the number of supervising, because of familiarity around that with regard to the supervising engineer, and it's been pointed out previously, while the primary legislation might say that, in reality it would be very unlikely that a reservoir manager would achieve that with a supervising engineer, but for the reasons that I've stated previously. So while the primary legislation might say 1 in every 5 years, it's highly unlikely that a supervising engineer would agree to that. And it might actually mean that reservoir engineers may not work and they may not take up the offer of supervising reservoirs in Northern Ireland. So we need to be careful about that as well. So the fourth one that we were asked to consider was that the committee wouldn't make any decision on the proposed amendment by the department and leave it to the House at consideration stage to consider it and to vote on that. Again, yes, we have no. Well, that might prove we would prefer that the committee did take a view on this, and that it influenced members of the House one way or the other on this. So that option is one that we would prefer to avoid if we could. And finally, the last one that we were asked to consider was to remove clauses 25 and 33 in their entirety. That would cause us a problem. Those clauses are very important. The part clauses within those are very important. Some of them are linked to offences. If the reservoir manager wasn't to comply with supervising engineer or inspecting engineer, particularly clause 33, there's a lot of responsibility on an inspecting engineer and a reservoir manager and supervising engineer in both of those clauses. And to remove those in their entirety would mean that we'd actually end up making a lot more amendments to the bill, because there are parts of those clauses that we would want to see in the bill and we would put them elsewhere in the bill. We would be proposing to move them out of that but it's my understanding that you're concerned with the number of supervising visits, and we think that you can do this without the need to remove 25 and 33. Okay, and then the last one that we were told to consider, and it was based on your conversation this afternoon, was that to introduce by regulation the number of visits that a supervising engineer would make. Again, that's doable, and we could do that in the face of the bill, and it would advise that the department would, by regulations, determine the number of visits by a supervising engineer, and we would make that by affirmative resolution. So we would have to bring it to the committee, to the House, to get approval, and we could consider doing that. The problem with that is that we would need to understand why that would be the case, because we would end up, I imagine, having this same conversation maybe in a couple of years' time, and that would be the issue for us around that. But it is, in terms of the bill, it is doable. We could do that. Thank you.
Okay. Members may have some questions. You do say that it is possible for us to, on clauses 25 and 33, to leave it the same as England and Scotland, where there's no specific inspections mentioned. Okay, that's just to clarify that. Okay.
Yes.
Tom?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that. Just to clarify, I'm relatively new back in the committee, so forgive me, I don't have all the clerk has certainly given me as much information as my small head can hold. But in relation to the control of visits and the control of whether an engineer will continue to look and inspect at the reservoirs at all, what you're trying to indicate to us is that if we don't make those inspections regular, that the engineer may just say, well, look, we're not going to cooperate, we're not going to continue to look at them. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that on the face of the bill, if there was a frequency of visits that was, say, 1 in every 5 years to a reservoir, that the reservoir engineer might decide, and the reservoir manager insisted that that was the frequency that he would come to visit the reservoir, the reservoir engineer may not take up that commission.
But they could also do that if it was once in every 3 years.
Yes.
So it's really in their hands. So once you put any time limit at all in, you're handing over control of those inspections entirely to the engineers.
Well, we were hoping that in putting a minimum number on the reservoir, that we would help the reservoir manager by giving him an indication of the number of times that a supervising engineer should visit the reservoir. So we are trying to help the reservoir manager in that regard. Ultimately, though...
I'll not say you're not, but I...
Okay.
I have great suspicion around all that.
But ultimately, the supervising engineer's job is to make sure that the reservoir is safe. Now, the responsibility for the safety of the reservoir rests with the reservoir manager. What we're trying to do is to introduce a regime here, a management regime, where the reservoir manager would call on an expert to guide and advise him on this engineering structure and to help him in that regard. Now, ultimately, the number of visits that a supervising engineer makes to a reservoir will depend on the condition of the reservoir. If he accepts a commission and the reservoir is in good condition and well maintained, and that the reservoir manager is well versed in what to look for in a reservoir, then the number of visits will be minimal.
Yes, but that's on the engineer's assessment of the condition of the reservoir.
That's right. And there's no getting away from that. You're absolutely right.
So there's a huge amount of control that rests within the engineer.
Yes. It's on his professional judgment as to to the number of visits that he makes, depending on the condition of the reservoir.
And it's the manager or the owner that has to pay for the engineer?
Yes.
Yeah. So really, we're putting that, if we were to accept this, you're putting that control solely within the engineer?
Well, the reservoir manager can, if he doesn't agree with the number of supervising visits, if he thinks that the engineer is arranging to come and visit the reservoir more often than he should, then he can raise that with the department.
Yeah, I would caution against that too.
Okay.
Probably end up getting a lot more. Sorry for being cynical.
You're all right. I'll not take it personally.
You do say that the reservoir manager can challenge the decision to yourselves
yes.
of the number of visits
yes.
if he thinks they're too excessive.
Yes.
Don't know whether that's not, where you would feel that's not satisfactory or not. If you put yourself in a manager's position, I can know where the previous members coming from in relation to the fact that a supervising engineer, of course, it's more lucrative for him to visit it fairly often if he's going to get paid. So it is difficulty, I think. We have great concerns about the cost.
Yes.
It could always be reversed, Chairman, that the supervising engineer has to demonstrate that he has good cause
yes.
to yourselves
yes.
for revisiting. So.
And to the reservoir manager.
Yes.
And that's why we put in the minimum. Because in Scotland, the reservoir manager, in England and Wales, the reservoir manager has no indication of how often a supervising engineer, the minimum number that he should come. So putting in one every 3 years for a medium consequence reservoir, if the supervising engineer was coming more often than that, then he would have to justify that to the reservoir manager. He would have to accept that, and if he didn't accept it, then and we could challenge that on his behalf.
I understand.
I think it's important.
He could refuse to pay if he thought it wasn't necessary.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it in the bill that there's opportunity for the manager to challenge that? Is that in there?
There's an amendment being put to the bill. We discussed this with the committee previously, and we're proposing an amendment to the bill at consideration stage, which will allow us to do that.
Okay.
Currently, as introduced, we can't.
Yeah, well, we would need to see that. Yeah, that amendment, we would need to see that amendment as soon as it is, and that will be before it goes to the house, you say?
You've already approved it.
Okay.
You've already seen it, and it was about the content.
Okay.
Do you remember we had the discussion about the quality and content of a reservoir report? We have done that. We're happy to share that again with you if you wish. Okay.
Okay, any other
Chair, I still, can I just come back to this? The reservoir manager, on this new amendment that you're putting in, it will allow him to challenge this if there's too many visits, so you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Then what happens if he refuses, say, another visit, or another 2 visits, everyone does? What happens then? Does it go to you people? Does it go to?
Yeah, well,
at what stage does someone step in and say what is the right number of visits, or what is a correct visit, or
well,
not a visit?
The Institution of Civil Engineers that have appointed the reservoir manager, or the reservoir engineer, we could raise it with them. You know, there is an ultimate sanction where the reservoir manager would be removed from the panel, or the reservoir engineer would be removed from the panel of engineers. That can be where a reservoir manager can call upon. So the panel of engineers is selected by the Institution of Civil Engineers and recommended to currently to DEFRA, and the DEFRA Secretary of State appoints or endorses that says a reservoir engineer can visit and examine a reservoir in England, Scotland and Wales. Under the bill, we will set up a similar panel, and our minister will appoint a panel of engineers. So the ultimate sanction would be that engineer would be removed from that panel and couldn't work on a reservoir if it was found that he was making more visits than was required to a reservoir. If there was evidence found that was the case. So the ultimate sanction is, yes, that he would be removed from the panel.
That would be after making the visits, wouldn't it? Making those?
Not necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily. No. Not necessarily.
But it could happen.
It could happen, yes.
Yeah,
but that would have to be with the agreement of the reservoir manager. You couldn't. I can't imagine there being an occasion where the supervising engineer would insist on going to visit a reservoir where the reservoir manager didn't want him there. Because remember,
that's where I'm coming from. So if that was the case where there's there was not agreement here.
Yes.
At what stage, who says, well, the supervisor should go and the engineer go and look at the reservoir, or shouldn't go? At what stage, or who says he shouldn't be there?
The reservoir manager decides.
Right.
On whether he accepts the supervising engineer's recommended number of visits. So a supervising engineer could come out to a reservoir and look at it and say, actually, I think I should come here 2 or 3 times a year. This isn't in good condition and I really need to keep an eye on this for you. And the reservoir manager says, well, it hasn't moved in the last 50 years, so why would that be the case? And if he didn't accept that, he says, sorry, do you know what? I'm going to ring another supervising engineer and get him out and get a second opinion on that. And he could go on with that. And get
at a cost.
Well, not if he wasn't commissioning the supervising engineer, no, because the supervising engineer would give him a cost a charge for his services at no cost to the reservoir manager. So it's just like, you know, calling on a consultant and saying, could you give me an estimate of how much it's going to cost me for you to advise and guide me on this reservoir over the next 12 months or 36 months. And it's my understanding that the supervising engineer can do that from photographs of the reservoir, from any documentation that there might be on the reservoir. So he wouldn't necessarily have to come out and visit, but he probably would. But that would just be to give him an estimate of the cost. The reservoir manager wouldn't have to accept that. There would be no obligation on him accepting that. It would only be after he had accepted that. Then he was tied into a contract between him and the reservoir or the supervising engineer. But up to that point, he could call, and the panel of engineers, there's like 180 there's upwards on 180 supervising engineers on these panels, so there's a large selection of to call on.
Here.
What?
There's only one here.
Yes, but we're
180.
Yes, but there's a reason for that. The reason is because we don't have any legislation in Northern Ireland governing reservoirs. So the work is in England, Scotland and Wales.
How quickly would that panel increase here, Kieran, if there was that panel to be set up and that work to be done can be done quite quickly to set up those engineers, supervising engineers?
We have, over the past couple of years, we have been at conferences and events where reservoir engineers attend. We have been explaining to them that legislation is being brought forward and asking them about their willingness to come and work in Northern Ireland and to be included in the panel for Northern Ireland. And very few have said that they wouldn't be. And they make the point that it's probably just as quick to get from London to Belfast as it is from London to Edinburgh or any other part of the United Kingdom. So travel isn't an issue for them. They would be prepared to come and work here. And what we would be hoping for, obviously, is that the number of supervising engineers in Northern Ireland would grow. So there would be local knowledge here.
Okay. They're also saying that the number of supervising engineers, if there's 120, that it'll be up to the reservoir manager to get the best price for doing the job.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Last, Oliver, first Oliver. Sorry. Well, I didn't. Okay.
Chair, thank you. Is there something within the bill that allows one engineer to go onto the list every year? Local?
No.
Commissioned for up to 5 years.
No. The other thing is, once the agreement is made and the reservoirs are then checked and tested, be it once a year,
once every 3 years,
every 3 years, whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, there'll be sort of a certificate or whatever the case may be go with that. Who would then have the responsibility of that? I'm thinking most of these high risk reservoirs are really high risk and what's in front of them, housing, whatever.
Yes.
And I'm thinking if anybody was coming in to do, say, some kind of building or economic regeneration, they would need to get a certificate of assurance that that is in order. Who would issue that?
This is around planning.
Yes, who would issue that?
There would have to be, there's an arrangement that we are making with the planning service that the planning service would receive a certificate from an inspecting engineer.
Qualified engineer.
Yeah, qualified engineer, that the reservoir was in good condition.
On behalf of the reservoir?
Yes. Yes, reservoir manager. Yes.
So can that engineer then charge for that, charge for the certificate?
He could, but it would be against whoever's making the planning application, because it would be up to them to...
Yes, they would.
They would have to advise the planning service that they have got certification that building could take place and that...
But surely that money should then go back to the reservoir manager, not so much the engineer. The reservoir manager then could claim part of that fee.
Yes, there's this arrangement that we have between a developer and a reservoir manager.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about before was where a development downstream was going to change the risk designation of a reservoir.
Yes.
And say you had a medium risk reservoir that when there was houses being proposed downstream would change the designation to high.
Yes.
So you would move from one visit every 3 years to one visit every year, and the increased costs that would be associated with that. Those costs, that's covered, and those costs would be incurred between negotiations between the developer and the reservoir manager.
Okay.
So planning service wouldn't give permission to build downstream unless they had received assurances from the reservoir manager that the reservoir was in good condition. And
but in fact, what I'm getting at here, the reservoir manager could have a degree of income here on that, so it would.
Yes.
It would offset his.
Yes. It's increased costs.
Increased costs.
Absolutely.
That's the point I'm making.
Absolutely.
Increased costs in his inspections.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But so the reservoir manager is in control of that all of the time.
I'm not in favour of the 5-year that you're talking about there, because I do think that's one of the things an engineer might look at, is that the fact that it was going 5 years, he's not having that degree of knowledge of his reservoir if it goes 5 years. He would have it if it's every 3, but not over 5.
Yes.
And I think there would be an ultimate cost to the reservoir manager at the end of the day on maintenance or whatever. You go 5 years.
Yes.
And you go 3 years, because
there's a risk. There's an increased risk that, we take the point that some of these reservoirs have never been looked at.
Yes.
And they haven't failed. But these are engineering structures that are man-made, that are holding back huge amounts of water. Mm-hmm. And what we're, through this legislation, is trying to ensure that those bodies of water are looked at, that there is engineers that periodically look at this. So we're not actually recommending that this is moved out to once every 5 years. We would rather that, for the safety of people downstream, we would rather that these reservoirs were looked at regularly. The department is prepared to keep the minimum at 1 every 3 years on the advice of the Institution of Civil Engineers, but extending that any further than that places the people downstream and the reservoir manager at great risk, because we know that some of these reservoirs have never been looked at, they've never been examined, and there's a great need for that to happen. And that's what the management regime that the bill is trying to introduce. And what we're trying to get here is a happy medium between being a belt and braces arrangement and one that works for the reservoir manager and works for the people who live downstream from a reservoir.
And at some stage there must be movement in there somewhere where, for example, that there is no more planning going to be.
Yeah.
Then there would be movement in there where that high risk reservoir could get downgraded to medium, for example, at any stage.
High risk, well, when you consider that a high risk or consequence reservoir has got its designation because there are people who live downstream within the flood inundation area and their lives will be placed at risk. So the only way that you could do that, Oliver, would be to remove the houses. But you could go from a medium to a high because a building appears down, or planning permission is given for a building within the inundation area and it places the people at risk from an uncontrolled release of water.
Edwin, push.
Yeah, I think that the issue and problem that you have is that not sure you've entirely convinced this committee of the need for the legislation in the first place, and consequently it could be even more challenging to convince the Assembly. And the reservoirs have been there for a long time, and there hasn't been much demonstration of risk, albeit legislation in other parts of the United Kingdom. So it would be probably good practice to do this. But I think that the problem that most of us have with the legislation is that we don't know what the problem is before we're legislating. Consequently, we're seeking to identify a cure without identifying the illnesses and the symptoms of it.
Yeah.
So, first of all, massively reluctant even to proceed with legislation at all. And that's something that will all require convincing about. Should we go down the route of legislation, I think in the first instance it should be light touch. We shouldn't be going in with extensive legislation. It can be added to, as opposed much easier probably, and it can be taken away. And 3 years isn't a long time going in. No harm to Mr McMullen. It's not a long time going in. If something is in excellent condition, it'll probably be in excellent condition in 3 years' time. And it may be more appropriate to be looking at 2 years and 5 years. But that's you know, something we have to be convinced about as well.
Yeah. On the issue of making a case for the legislation, we acknowledge that. We have formally acknowledged that. The Minister has acknowledged that by proposing that the bill is introduced in 2 phases. That when you talk about a light touch, you know, the bill as proposed and all of the amendments contained therein would go forward. There are 215 amendments to the bill to date, but that would go forward and be enacted. Only certain parts of the bill would come in on royal assent. But the bill, in essence, would be to acknowledge this very point around making the case for the bill, that phase 1 would be your light touch, if you want to regard it as that. It would be what we refer to as the non-recurring parts of the bill, and that would be where it would, we would define what a reservoir is. We would define who the reservoir manager should be. We would place a responsibility on the department to give a consequence designation, be highly, low or medium. And finally, it would place a requirement on the reservoir manager to commission an inspection of the reservoir. Now, that's different from a supervising engineer. It's an inspection that happens every 10 years. Now, phase 2 of the bill is where the recurring parts of it, and that's where this part of the bill that we're discussing comes in, because the supervising engineer commissioning is in phase 2 of the bill. The need or the requirement to actually do anything with an inspection report would be in phase 2. So that part of the bill wouldn't be commenced. So we would have a bill that is enacted, certain parts of it would be commenced, but the phase 2 would be would only commence with a vote in the Assembly, and it would only we would only bring that forward for commencement when we had the reservoirs audit completed, so that we would be able to present information on the condition of the reservoirs and an estimated cost of repair for those reservoirs. So we're taking that forward in parallel with the bill. So the committee has already considered that and accepted that proposal from the department and the Minister's assurance around that. If that position was to change, we would like to know that in advance of moving the bill to consideration stage, because it's on that basis that we're moving the bill, or prepared to move the bill, or recommend to the Minister that she moves the bill to consideration stage.
You can understand whether some of us feel that we're working in the dark or something.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the problem from where we're doing this. And I have raised concerns like many others as members of the committee over this last year.
None of us determine why it wasn't carried out in the first instance.
Well,
that's just can't get my head around that one. That, you know, we didn't identify the scale of the problem, be it a big problem or it could be a very, very small problem. I don't know.
But this is about prevention. You know, if we came to the committee with an audit that said, that all of the reservoirs in Northern Ireland were in good condition, would that mean that we didn't need regulation around that? If we come and say, well, actually, all of the reservoirs in Northern Ireland are in very poor condition, does that mean that we definitely need legislation around that? You know, this is about, because of the nature of these reservoirs, you know,
particularly the point is, though, you would be able to or we as a committee and MLAs would have a much better opportunity to assess it then, and what was required. I think that's the point.
Yes.
I'm
And
taking
that
that as
legislation in the democracy, or basically?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm. The proposal, and the department accepted that, and you know, we are where we are. Yes, we've taken the comments on board that we perhaps should have done that in advance, but we are where we are. And the Minister proposed that we move the bill forward and we do the audit in parallel with that, and that the recurring parts of the bill are held until that audit is completed, and the committee considers the content of that, how the condition of the reservoirs, and then decides whether or not to commence phase 2 of the bill. Now, that's the position that we're in, that we're at the moment. If the committee is considering changing its position on that, then the Minister needs to know that.
Okay. Joe
Yeah, well, Chairman, again, I suppose I'm in the same position as most people, that I would have prepared if we'd come from a position of a realisation of what was the actual status of the entire stock of reservoirs at the start. But given where we're at, it's now a situation about a judgment about do we allow the bill to proceed in majority part, so to speak, given the amount of time that has gone into it, and also given the fact that we've embarked on this process. Am I right in saying that we were informed at the start that this was relating to an EU requirement at some states?
Yes, there is the EU Floods Directive that recommends that every European state needs to look at its floods and a flood risk and assess the flood risk. And when the department was assessing the flood risk for Northern Ireland, it included reservoirs in that flood risk, and it identified that there was no regulation in Northern Ireland, unlike England, Wales and Scotland, around reservoirs, in relation to reservoirs. And it sought the agreement of the executive to bring forward primary legislation to close that gap, and that approval was obtained, and that's why we are here bringing forward this primary legislation. So yes, it has its, in a way, it has its roots in the Floods Directive.
The other point, Chairman, that I think we're all somewhat more conscious of is that there is a situation where we do have more flash flooding. It is a reality of life in this last 10 or 12 years. And I think we would have to be careful that in a situation where there are some reservoirs that are near built-up areas or urban areas, if it were to happen, for example, Derry City is a place where we've had flash flooding in the last 10 years, twice at least. And given that there's one reservoir in particular flooding close to Derry City, we have to be mindful of unforeseen circumstances, consequences. We'll be lacking in public responsibility if we didn't at least proceed. But I think that the department should be a bit more helpful in relation to facilitating the work that we had to do. Thanks, sir.
Okay. What is the role of the inspecting engineer here regarding the number of visits by a supervising engineer? Does he have the say in them many times?
Yes, he does. He can recommend that the frequency of supervising visits is increased beyond the minimum.
If, for instance, and I have no idea what the decision of this committee is going to be at the end of the day, but if the committee decided to go with Scotland and Wales with no maximum number of visits, what would be the protection for the reservoir manager in relation to, or how is that managed, or how do they manage the number of visits, or when there should be a visit or when not?
You know, they would
be left to the supervising
yes,
engineer.
it would be left to the supervising engineer. It would, if an inspecting engineer recommended to a reservoir manager that the supervising engineer visits should increase in frequency, the reservoir manager, if he didn't agree with that, could raise that with the department in the same way that he could raise it if a supervising engineer wanted to come more often.
Yeah.
There's also a dispute referral mechanism within the bill, but that really is asking a reservoir manager to commission another reservoir engineer to have a look at that for him. That's why we made the amendment in the bill to allow the department to challenge that if we felt that it was appropriate to do so. But in England, Scotland and Wales, they don't have a minimum, and that is left between the reservoir manager and the inspecting engineer or supervising engineer to agree on the frequency, and for the inspecting engineer and supervising engineer to justify to the reservoir manager the number of visits that should be made.
Okay. That's okay. And in relation to what the Deputy Chairperson has just said, we are aware that there may be one, and I'm told there's one in Camlock in my constituency that also is highly, could be dangerous.
Yes.
It's unfortunate that, and it would be much easier for us and much easier for yourselves if those number of high risk are the ones that were a threat had been identified much earlier, and maybe a two-tier or some way of bringing forward legislation that didn't incorporate
all of them.
Many of those that are probably never going to be an issue.
Yes.
But that's where we are. Anyone else before officials? Everyone else happy? Covered everything?
Tie down the options, Chairman, of what we are. You know, you've offered to the committee to compromise the 1 year and 3 years. The one with
yes.
Yes.
That's the department's proposed position.
Medium
at the
risk,
moment. Yeah.
And
1 year and 3 years.
And if we were unhappy with that.
No. The committee weren't happy with.
No, but if the committee after today isn't happy with that,
yes.
What's the options? Just throw it out, or is there another option?
Well, you can come up with a different frequency if you wanted. The committee could come with a different frequency, and as I said, the department would make that amendment if the committee so wished. On the committee's behalf, we could amend the bill to reflect a lesser frequency of visits. But the point I made earlier was that while the primary legislation might say that as a minimum, in reality it would be unlikely that a reservoir manager would be able to achieve that minimum unless the reservoir was in really good condition. So in many instances he may not be able to secure that.
What scale is a medium reservoir?
Scale.
What size? What's
the designation isn't determined by the size of the reservoir. It's determined by what is downstream. So a high consequence reservoir is determined because there are people who live downstream and live close enough to the reservoir where their lives are at risk from an uncontrolled release of water. A medium consequence reservoir is where there is no one living downstream, but there might be economic activity disrupted by an uncontrolled release of water, or cultural heritage ruined because of it, or the environment ruined because of it. A low consequence reservoir is where none of those exist, and the reservoir is out in the country and might breach into farmland, for example. But that, again, could be argued that that's disrupting economic activity. But those are so it's not really on the size of the reservoir. So it's actually some of the privately owned reservoirs. The average privately owned reservoir is 100,000 cubic metres of water, 10 times the limit, with on average 500 people living downstream in the inundation area. That's a privately owned. When we talk about privately owned reservoirs, okay, we're not talking about the big Northern Ireland Water, Silent Valley type, but there are some of them that hold huge amounts of water that are held back by earth bank dams that have been there since the beginning of the last century and haven't been examined, looked at, or maintained in any way. And the longer they go without being looked at, the more likely is that something will happen unknown to the reservoir manager. In fact, we do know that some reservoir managers don't recognise that they've got a reservoir. They think it's a lake, but it's not, and it's held back by a man-made earth dam that's got animals living in it. It's got shrubbery growing in it. You know, that kind of thing. So, like Craigavon Lakes is a reservoir, for example. It looks like, and they're called lakes. Camlock is not a loch or a lake, it's a reservoir. So there are, just trying to paint the picture here that these things were built over 100 years ago for the mill industry in the main. They're now, have been taken over and inherited by people who don't recognise what they are, but they're holding back huge amounts of water. And are placing at risk, if they're not looked after, they're placing at risk the people who live downstream. And that's our concern, and that's why we're trying to bring forward this legislation, to try and protect life, economic activity, cultural heritage, and the environment from an uncontrolled release of water from one of these bodies.
So if a lake's man-made, it's not a lake?
It's not a lake. No. It's a reservoir.
Even if it's in a sump and it's not liable to escape?
That's right. If it's there's different definitions of a well, there's different definitions of a reservoir. Sumps aren't.
Very low land.
Sorry. Well, it's above
has to be held above the natural level of the surrounding land for it to be a reservoir.
Yes.
Okay. Well, can we maybe ask the officials to...
Does the committee want to go into closed session again?
Maybe into closed session, maybe we should.
I think within 10 minutes, Chairman.
We do, I think we do.
Okay. Fine, thank you.
You can make yourselves available again for instance.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
We're going to take them through the 5 options. Take them through the 5 options. So we'll decide on the page.
Okay, the committee has agreed, and I'm going to read out to what we have agreed, okay?
Okay.
The committee requires that the department bring forward a regime on the number of visits by a supervising engineer by regulation, subject to draft alternative procedure. Alternative procedure? Affirmative procedure, okay, we'll get there. The department should prepare to discuss the details of what is in the regulation with the committee, but as
an early indication,
we would like to see that. Supervising regime, as per the amendment, would until reservoirs are brought up to a standard acceptable to the department, and then push the visits out further once reservoirs have been subject to that and are repaired. To be pushed out further to a standard acceptable to the department.
Okay.
Can you tell us what your position is on this?
Well, okay. First of all, just so that I understand it, what you're asking is that no, it's okay. No, I've got it. So I just want to make sure that I've got it. That you're asking the department to set out the number of supervising visits by regulations rather than in the face of the bill. That's the first thing.
Yep.
And secondly, in making those regulations, you want the flexibility within those regulations to set a standard, or the number of frequency of those visits, and that the regulations would enable the frequency and number to be revised
Yeah.
on once the standard of the reservoir is established.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. Yes, we'll consider that. I can't give a commitment now. Obviously, this is subject to ministerial approval.
Okay.
But we will take that away. We will consider that, and we will come back to the committee as soon as we can on that.
Okay.
Okay. This is a tricky amendment to the bill because it's linked into the reservoir designation, because the number of visits is determined by the designation of the reservoir, whether it's high, medium or low. So it's linked into that regime. So it is doable. We just need to consider whether the department, it's in the interest of the department to do that.
And one would have thought, I mean, speaking thinking out loud, one would have thought if a reservoir is there for 100 years, it was inspected and brought up to standard, why does it need to inspected then every 12 months or?
Not an inspection, this is a visit by a supervising engineer.
Yeah.
An inspection's, an entirely
Yeah.
different regime. It's 1 in 10 years.
Yeah. There is that point, but what we're trying to do is to bring in a regime where everybody is satisfied that a reservoir is being maintained properly. And we take the point around the concern around the costs of that to a reservoir manager. And we know that we're trying to get reach a happy medium here. I'm saying that doing what the committee is asking is possible, but the department needs to consider that and then come back to the committee and let you know whether or not it is prepared to do that.
Okay.
So we need to consider it.
Okay. Any questions? Any other questions that members would ask before?
Sorry?
I'm just asking if any other members would ask you a question before on this issue. Everyone happy?
Can I ask the rationale for this is we would need, it would be helpful if we knew that, because we need to share that rationale with the Minister. As I said when I mentioned it earlier, it could be that all we're doing is delaying making a decision around this for 1 or 2 years, and we'll be in this same position maybe when we bring forward the regulations. I was just wondering what the committee's rationale for asking the department to make regulations is. I'm not asking for that now, but if that could be put to the department, then we can share that with the Minister.
Yeah, the clerk will write to you.
Okay.
That's okay?
That's great. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, and sorry for...
Okay, no. Thank you very much.
Page 16.
Agenda item 8, oral briefing, dark fishing opportunities 2015. And I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 53 to 54, and papers from the department are at pages 55 to 60. Can I welcome Ian Humes, Principal Officer, and Paddy Campbell, Deputy Principal. I'm going to give you up to 10 minutes to make a presentation, and I'm sure you're a big lad that we're not looking at give a longer one than that, but can I apologise for keeping you so long? It was totally beyond our control today. So apologise and just ask you to make your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the time of year when we come and tell you about what the Commission is proposing in terms of fishing opportunities for our fleet next year. The one stock that affects our fleet most is it's called nephrops, or Norway lobster. And unfortunately, the Commission has not yet made a proposal on that. The reason being is that the scientific advice for most stocks was published at the end of June, and for this particular stock it's just available at the end of October. So we had the Commission's proposals published before that. So we're expecting them to come and make a revised proposal before we go to the December Council on the 14th of December. But we have a fair idea of what will happen. This particular stock, which is extremely important to our fleet, fished by 95% of the boats that fish out of County Down. It is the main catch in all respects. It is the catch on which our processors depend. And we see that this year the science has indicated that a slightly better position than previous years is up by 3% overall. I should explain that that figure is 18,118 tonnes, which is a recommended, which is what we call the sum of the science. These prawn stocks, there are 7 separate stocks that are being assessed by scientists right round in the Irish Sea, round the south coast and up the west coast of Ireland. And they go and look at those grounds individually, and they come to a figure on what can be safely taken from those grounds. And so they have 7 figures, which all collectively add up to 18,118 tonnes. Now, the total allowable catch for this area is currently 20,989 tonnes. So if the Commission do as we expect them to do, they'll make a proposal which is equal to the science. We will see a 14% cut. Sorry, I should mention that there is an error in the table that is in Annex A. And Norway lobster at the bottom, the 4th column should read 18118. And the reduction is 14%. All their papers detailing or describing the scientific advice and this stock are accurate in all respects. It's that we've got that table wrong, and I'm sorry about that. But this is a similar situation to where we were last year. We have always the two big quota holders in this stock are ourselves in Ireland. And we've always been successful in persuading the Commission to settle on a total allowable catch which is more than the science. And the reason being for that is that there are 4 countries that have a share of this stock. We have about 32.8, Ireland 38 point something. Spain have 6% and France 24, thereabouts. And France and Spain don't catch everything that they're entitled to catch. Thus, and we can catch more than we would be if we were to do that. So we argue that you should have a higher figure, so therefore 32.8 or 32.8% of that figure is going to be more, and we can take that on the Irish Sea, which is where it's fished. Overall, the prawn stock is in good order. We have some concerns that in recent years it's been fished quite hard in the northern part of the Irish Sea, but our scientists say that there is no immediate cause for concern, but certainly you can't continue to fish it that hard in the longer term. So it's been a situation which is very, very carefully monitored and studied by scientists. So we expect that given that there hasn't been any real change or much change to the advice, the scientific advice for this stock, that we think that a reasonable result would probably be maintaining the current level of fishing for 2015, in other words, a rollover in the present TIC. Looking at some of the other stocks, herring is a fishery where mainly taken by 2 boats, 3 boats sometimes, off the Isle of Man. It's a fishery which has an MSC accreditation for its sustainability. The fishing is based on a maximum sustainable yield, and the scientific advice or the recommended catch reflects that scientific advice. It's not something that we oppose. That is policy. Policy is to actually arrive at fishing at MSY for all fisheries by 2020, where possible by 2015, but for all of them by 2020. So it's already at MSY, and so there'll be no change there. Cod stock remains poor. There's a huge difference of opinion between scientists and fishermen, but the scientists are saying that stock remains poor. Accordingly, there is a cod recovery plan with built-in mechanisms to reduce the allowable catch of cod whenever there are certain indicators, and that's what has happened. The 20% cut in that stock represents the scientific advice and the plan. On the other hand, haddock and plaice are... the Commission has a policy that says that if you do not have an analytical assessment of a fish stock, well, then it's thought to be data limited in some way. Now, that may mean that you have 95% of the information, or nearly all of the information that you need to put into an assessment model, but haven't got some key pieces of information, therefore you can't run a model. So you have to do it on the basis of trends and looking at different things year on year. They say in those circumstances that the scientists should recommend a catch limit based on the average catch over the last number of years. So the figures for haddock and the figures for plaice, for example, suggested by ICES, the scientific body, reflect the average catches over the last number of years. On the other hand, the Commission's policy is that in those cases where there isn't an analytical assessment, but a trends-based assessment, that they will limit that cut to 20%. We think that there is absolutely no case for a cut of 20% in those stocks, because the indications are that these stocks are healthy. This is a matter of policy, and this is where you actually get into a debate with the Commission about whether or not the policy is appropriate. It has been the UK's policy, because if you do this, you're actually saying to people that if you don't fish it, you will lose it. And that has been a policy that has been imposed by the UK in negotiations over the last number of years. So I fully expect that in terms of going to the Commission and saying to them, we'll be looking for a rollover because of the basis of what the science is saying. Other stocks remain poor. Whiting, for example, really, really bad. And sole, the stock is also poor there. The thing I should say is that there's very, very little in way of commercial landings of whiting by our fleet. We do take a lot of it. We take a lot of it as a bycatch in the prawn fishery, and none of it is marketable. And sole is also a stock where there is a limited amount taken. And for example, on the sole fishery, we only have about 11% of the UK share, and for plaice with 31%. All of those other stocks we are in the high 70s, so they're far more important to us. But really, that's the situation. The big story, as always, is prawns. It's an argument over the way it's managed and how you should set the TAC and how much we should get as a result of it.
As you say, the TAC for prawns appears to be complicated this year. Is it fair to say that Northern Ireland's looking at a potential cut, or do you think there's a good chance of a rollover?
I couldn't say. I think that the Commission's starting point will always be to say, well, look, when you add up all the scientific advice, it equals 18,118. That's our starting point. I think it's more difficult to argue it this year, because one of the things we've been able to say in the past is that other countries like France and Spain don't take all of their share. Therefore, it's okay to set it at a higher level and we get a bigger amount as our fixed share of that. But in more recent years, our colleagues in the south have been swapping in some quota with France, and they have been using up the French quota, so it makes it a bit more difficult to say, hey, you can safely set it at a higher rate because, you know, we can trust the French and the Spanish, they won't fish it. So, but whenever you start to swap in from those countries, well, then you undermine that argument. So it could be that, well, I believe, having gone to 7 or 8 of these in a row, I can't imagine that the Commission is going to say at the outset, okay, we've looked at this and you can have the same as last year. They will always start off with a reduction, yeah.
Okay. The increase in prawns appears to be mainly in the smalls, which lie south-east of Ireland.
Yep.
The West Irish Sea has been fished above maximum sustainable yields. Can the Northern Ireland fleet fish in the smalls? I mean,
well, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the issue to do with the way the stock is managed. You know, you get a fixed percentage of an overall total allowable catch that applies to all of the grounds right around Ireland and in the Irish Sea. So there's nothing to stop our fishermen from going and taking all of their fish in another area, for example, or as they do at the moment, they take most of it in the northern part of the Irish Sea, and then a small amount, maybe 200 or 300 tons in the smalls. It's not, but there's nothing to stop them from taking more there,
okay,
other than economics, I suppose.
Okay. Kieran McCarthy.
Yeah, Chair, thanks very much for your presentation. I don't know that there's very much good news in what you've said. I mean, we don't seem to be making much progress despite the setbacks over the years that our fishing fleet and industry has had to suffer. You mentioned the total allowable catch for the area was 20,989, and yet there's to be a cut. Is that the way I understand it? An 18% cut in quarter.
About 14 probably, yeah.
14. Well, I mean, the tonnage is up, but yet the percentage is going to be down. Is that right? Or
No,
the percentage is going to be more cut back on the prawns.
No. Okay. Last year, if we were sitting here last year, I would have been telling you that scientific advice, the sum of the scientific advice was about 17,900 tonnes. And that was the proposal that the Commission made last year, that you should have a TAC at 17,900 tonnes. But we went to the December Council and we were able to persuade them that it was safe to set the TAC higher than that figure because others weren't fishing their share. This year the science is up slightly. Instead of being 17,900, it's now 18,118 tonnes. So I expect the Commission to start at that same point and say that's what we think you should take. And I expect us to have some success in getting above that 18,118 figure because we feel that it's right and it's safe to do so because of the way it's managed. But you know, overall the science, some of the science has got better, but there have been changes in some of the 7 grounds that are assessed. The one that has shown, I think, the depletion is in the East Irish Sea. The smalls has shown an increase in abundance in terms of the number of prawns that are there. But we have to be very careful because even though the TAC is set for the whole of the area, these fish don't migrate. You know, they live in mud burrows, and they live wherever there is mud. So it's not as if you know, they shoal or move around. They are resident in certain parts of the sea. So if you were to fish those areas too hard, it could lead to not a stock collapse, but it could lead to a poorer return next year. So that's where you have to watch that you continue to fish this at a level which is safe. And there are indications that in the northern part of the Irish Sea at the moment, we're maybe taking too much from there. We could maybe spread our fishing to other places.
Can you answer the accusation that scientists are still too precautious, and I mean our own fishermen would say that there's more there than that they're letting on to be, and we should be getting our fleet out and getting them. Are you still? I mean, is there any room for manoeuvre in relation to what the scientists are saying, what the fishermen are saying?
There's always an issue of interpretation. You know, the scientists are given a job to do by the Commission. They're asked to come and say to the Commission, give us some advice on what we should safely catch. But at the same time, the Commission also set them some parameters on how they should do their work. So they will come around and answer the questions that are put by the Commission. You know, I think that I haven't yet come across a circumstance where a fisherman has ever said to a scientist, you know, you're wrong. There's actually less fish there than you say. But you know, if you're making a living from this, they're probably inclined to say there is more fish than people are allowing you to catch. I mean, I think that may be natural enough, but. Our fisheries scientists are independent. They go and they collect data. They bring data and they bring it to the ICES organisation. Their work is peer reviewed and is examined by others, and they follow appropriate protocols. They have no axe to grind. They only are there to report the findings. So if there is a difference of opinion, I don't know what...
Well, yeah, I mean, you can understand the frustration of fishermen. I mean, we've been on this journey for a number of years. In fact, every year we go through the same procedure. We cut back. You did have some success to a certain degree last year. And, you know, the fishermen, you know, and the industry as a whole would hope and expect that as the years go on, the catch would be increasing and the livelihoods of the people would be increasing, but that doesn't seem to be the case. We're still at a very low level. Despite all the sacrifices that has been made, despite all the fishermen that we've lost, etc., etc.
Well, it is what it is. You can't have a sustainable fishery unless you have a sustainable fish stock. And our business, and the business of the Minister, is to make sure that there is a fish stock there for future generations to fish. And the amount that you can safely take is informed by science. So when the scientists say that it is safe to take that amount, then you take that amount. If, on the other hand, your primary concern is to make sure the fishermen are happy, well, then you say, go and fish as much as you want, but you may not have it there in future years. So this is about responsible fisheries management. It's about taking a science-based approach. It's about determining advice based on science, and about setting a fishing opportunity for people that we believe is sustainable and will make sure that there is a fishery there in future, and therefore fishery communities that depend on it. But there are many, many other factors that affect the fortunes of the fishing fleet, and some of them are beyond the issue of stock. Things like the price of fuel, the input costs, the market prices that they get for their fish when they bring it, what is then done with it, whether there's added value from that landings, whether they enjoy it or benefit from it as a community. So, but certainly having stability is important, because then people can make investment decisions. And we've had a reasonably stable prawn stock over the last number of years. Has gone up, and you know, it's bobbed along at a level. But I don't think it's. I think that there are other areas where there are causes for concern, because the stocks are not recovering, despite the fact that we've been far more selective. Maybe there are other factors that have come into play. But even if there are other factors, there's only one thing that you can control, and that is the fishing industry. You cannot control climate change, for example. So if you think that climate change is having an effect on a stock and it is depleting a stock, well, then it may be under those circumstances that you have to fish less of it. That's not the fisherman's fault. But that's the only thing that you can control.
Finally, okay. Chairman, hearing what you said, and fishermen are responsible people, are you as a department committed to ensure that the fishing industry survives in Northern Ireland? Because at times it looks like that we're on a downward spiral, and on it goes.
Well, yeah, we're committed to having a fishing industry which is based on the sustainable exploitation of healthy fishing stocks, yes.
Well, let's wish you all the best when you go to Brussels in December, and come back with a good report. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, Adam Pritchett.
Yeah, I'm getting mixed signals from you, so I'm not sure what the officials in Brussels are going to get, because you're saying the science is saying that we can go up 3% in NEFROC stuff, but you know, you're indicating that you think that that's been probably overfished for a number of years. So, so are you going with science, armed with science, and sticking wholly to the science, or are you going with something else?
Well, I perhaps haven't made ourselves clear. The overall increase of 3% is because it's the sum of 7 different assessments. Some are up, some are down.
Yeah. So we're taking in the southeast Ireland as well as...
Yeah, altogether it's up by 3% on last year. You've got a fixed share of a number that the Commissioner we eventually decide upon, a total allowable catch. you can take that anywhere in those 7 areas. So you can. And our share of the catch at the moment is 6,885 tonnes. And that 6,885 tonnes can be taken by our fleet or by the UK fleet anywhere within Area 7, all in one of those 7 areas or over a certain number of them. And this is the problem with the management of the stock. It's because there are no controls over the exploitation of individual stocks that cause the scientific community some cause for concern. But we think that overall, that the fishing stock, the fishery is still in good health, and that we will be pushing for a maintenance of fishing opportunities. But I mean, you could have, for example, next year a change in behaviour by, say, some part of the Southern Fleet, and they decide to then go and fish for a lot more of their stock in the northern part of the Irish Sea, and there's nothing that you can do to prevent that. Equally, as somebody had pointed out, the smalls is now 27% better in terms of the health of the stock. Maybe our fleet decides to all go down there and take most of its stock down there. That is a problem, and that's a problem that the Commission is sensitive to. There is and they have suggested in the past a different approach to managing this fishery. But generally, that is opposed. Their suggestion was opposed by many member states, and also is opposed by our own industry for their own reasons.
So I take out of that 3 or 4 minutes there that the answer is that you are going out looking for an increase in the NEFROPs.
The Minister hasn't finalised her negotiating position, Mr. Poots, and I think that all of the signals would suggest that she will at least want to have a maintenance of fishing opportunities.
I think the fishermen probably want a little more than that, but and on the cod stock, I'm sure you can give me that assurance that you're not supporting this reduction, given.
Well, actually, we don't support the reduction. It's coming from a management plan, and one of the reasons why we don't support the reduction is that our fleet has made tremendous efforts over the years to introduce highly selective gear. Yeah. And we now are adopting and using gears which the Commission and its scientific advisors deem to be highly selective. In other words, they can constrain the catch of cod to below 1.5% of the total catch. And we have some of the most selective gears in use anywhere in these waters by all of our fleet as a management measure. Now, you will inevitably catch some cod in the process, and therefore, if you simply cut the number, you're leading to more discarding, which is not what the common fisheries policy is about. No. So we'll be saying yes. Now this is a nonsense. Now the cod plan is not actually working in favour of the new common fisheries policy. And the other area that we're going to be talking to, well, we have approached the Commission already last year about having what we call scientific quota to enable us to carry out targeted fisheries to tell us what the stock is doing, whether it's recovering or not recovering, because we're not having the data that we're needing at the moment to be able to inform some decisions. So we'll be asking, and my Minister will be asking Mr. Coveney to support the proposition that there is a special amount set aside for scientific purposes, so we can maintain the scientific effort on assessing this particular stock. But we think that actually simply to cut the quota for cod is just a nonsense, given where we've come as an industry.
Okay.
Chair, thanks. Thank you. It's a very brief point of clarification I'm looking for. The table, if it's set in the same way as ours, is Annex B table. It gives you the years from 2000 up to 2015, the TAC, the landing, the advice.
Yeah.
Just checking that in 2014 then Neathorpes haven't actually decreased there.
we're getting about the same total allowable catch, 2,000.
This is certainly one of the points that we put to the Commission, that if you look at the landings over the years and you look at what some of the scientific advice, they're roughly broadly about the same. In many cases, the landings have been below the scientific advice. You will see a change that happened in 2007, 2008, 2009. Or basically 2007, which was the big increase. That was when there was a change of heart by the Commission. That was when they decided that it's safe to set a TAC at a higher level because some people don't land fish, and that is. That was when the main change happened, but then it's been bobbing up and down since then, and it's back down to about 21,000. In terms of the landings, the estimate for landings of 2014, that seems low, Polly.
That's the latest figures on the system. So it seems unlikely we're going to get much. That's what we've calculated between now and the end of the year, based on the landings.
That would show that we're about a third. Our landings are about a third below our TAC.
That's all countries.
That's all countries.
That 1,400 or 14,000 is all countries, and some countries, because of their reporting and when they put on data, lag behind others. So it's difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I looked at it. I made the calculation of 14,000 is based on where we were at this time. The figures this year compared with last year, and they're down about 1,000 tonnes. But we had about 15,000 tonnes on the system last year at this stage.
Okay.
All right. Okay. What discussion has the Minister had with the industry in relation to catch?
Well, she's due to have a meeting with the industry before going to Brussels now to just really confirm with them what the priority should be. But I have to say that it doesn't vary much from year to year, because we've been getting a similar position really from Europe and from the advice. So, I fully expect that the industry will be pressing her to make sure that there's no loss in fishing opportunities, and the points that I've been making on cod about it being just really a pointless exercise to cut it by 20%. And so they will agree with us in opposing the kind of cuts that we're seeing in place and in haddock, because the scientific advice indicates that the stock's in good health. So, the position of the industry and the Minister is likely to be very, very close, as it always is, because we all share the same priorities and every year.
Okay. Has cod recovery made much of it?
Has cod made much of a recovery?
Yeah.
Not really. We're certainly a little bit. In the more detailed side, we can certainly provide the committee with the scientific advice on cod to show how things have changed over time, but generally the cod plan has some trigger points, and the trigger points are that if the biomass is 6,000 tonnes, or less than 6,000 tonnes, then there has to be an annual reduction in the amount of fish taken. And the biomass is nowhere near 6,000 tonnes. It's somewhere above 2,000 tonnes or thereabouts. So it's got a way to go before the cod plan doesn't make automatic reductions. But then some people say that some of those targets are no longer appropriate. The cod plan is something that I think has got a limited shelf life. It will probably be replaced in the future by some sort of a fisheries management plan for the Irish Sea, which is not just cod, but is multi-species. So, but for the moment we have it, and for the moment the Commission follow the rules.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
That's where we are. Kieran, you want to ask a quick question?
Before you go, is the department still up for helping the fishermen in terms of, you mentioned it yourself, Ian, about the huge expense, oil being one of the things, to try and keep the boats out in the sea because of the huge cost of oil. Is the department up for any grant aid or whatever in whatever direction.
That's a decision for the Minister, but I have to say that operational subsidy is not something which is consistent with the common fisheries policy. And you do not subsidise the operating costs of an industry. There may be some circumstances which will lead to compensation where there is an exceptional circumstance, but operational costs are not things that are routinely subsidised.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much again for the presentation, and again, sorry for holding you back so long. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Agenda item 10, written briefing and joint CAP paper update. And can I refer members to the updated briefing paper on CAP on pages 120?
Can I first? Page 17. You missed it.
Why did I? Okay, sorry, I apologise. Okay. Agenda item 9, written briefing Dord SL1 draft CAP direct payments to farmers under support schemes, cross compliance regulations, Northern Ireland 2015. Refer members to the memo for the clerk at pages 62 to 63 and papers from the department at pages 64 to 116. Can I advise members that it is anticipated that the rule will come into operation on the 1st of January 2015 and aims to amend the Northern Ireland cross compliance legislation to ensure that the Commission requirements will be fully complied with. The revised GAEC requirements were subject to consultation in April 2014 and were discussed at the committee meeting on the 1st of July when no issues were raised. Can I seek comments from members? There's quite a bit. Quite a bit to this.
Chair?
Yeah.
It strikes me that somebody sits there and, as opposed to actually looking at how things are working out and take a logical decision based upon that, it's about how they can always increase regulation. So I see you and red tape, and the department's supposed to be working, to reduce red tape, and it's not entirely the fault of the department. This is EU, a lot of it, but we do need to point out where some of these things get a bit ridiculous. Requiring permission to actually fill in a shop, put a few pipes in the shop, and stone over it. Nonsense. Complete and total nonsense. Requiring permission to take a tree out of a head thing, again, is a complete and total nonsense. Now, how in the name of goodness are you supposed to reduce red tape and regulations whenever you have people coming forward with ridiculous proposals like that? And the Minister does need to resist these sort of things very strongly.
Yes.
Those are just examples. There's more.
There's more. There's many more. A bit official.
No, if you want to, we can try and pull the officials up next week if you want to.
What about getting the officials up? If you wanted to give them a proper grill on this, what does members think? Yeah, this is written.
Probably a fixed time, I don't know.
Can it be filled in?
Maybe make 3 briefings next week if you're happy enough with that.
Maybe get about at least you can. There's an issue, and how the committee feels on an issue of extending the hedge cutting season to include August, which would help with those reseeding, help with those put in autumn cereals. Yeah. It's an issue maybe that isn't it.
Come before the committee before, yeah.
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 I know there is some. I think we're hoping to make some movement on this. I'm told so. Would it be in order for us to write to the Minister on it or not?
On the hedge cutting to extend the season to August?
Yeah, in all circumstances. In some circumstances whereby it would benefit reseeding and sale rows. Is members happy with that?
As long as the present season in operation.
Sometimes last 5 years or so.
It's one of those that I think it's actually legal for everybody. That includes ordinary householders to cut their hedges.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You're actually allowed to cut roadside hedges.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of people top them when you're not actually supposed to top them.
That's probably right. Strictly speaking.
It's for road safety.
Yes. You're not supposed to top
You don't need
them.
to top a hedge for road safety, but
Most people do when they're doing it. Yeah.
voice down here because it'll probably start the farmers next year. So it's going on.
But it would be only in certain circumstances, and I was speaking to the Minister for 1 second on this, and I think she would be of the same view that we'll be going to try and move on this if we can. So just let her at the committee supports that view. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want the officials up on this SL1?
Could we get the farmers tops their hedges or cuts their hedges to clean the roads? Christ, they do more than burst tyres and punctures and.
So you have to keep somebody at a job.
Who does? Whenever they never take the bits of timber off the road at all.
They're getting officials up
And
on
you end up getting them through your tube.
The one thing about that, and then if the hedge wasn't cut and there's a bit of frost and sun being cleared, to be whinging about that too.
No, well, the hedge stops you from sliding.
Okay. Is everyone happy? Can we confirm that we'll ask officials up next week for a quick briefing? Or not?
That's fine. I think it's need to limit them maybe a bit or concentrate on a few things. Maybe concentrate on where the changes are.
Yeah. Yes.
You know,
that's what would be important.
And whether those are, Mr. Poots says, EU regulations or whether any of them are coming in from their own.
There's one big issue that is affecting a lot of large farms is cross compliance in tag inspections. If you had a single tag animal, you were given 28 days to replace that tag. The new cross compliance is, I think, if any one individual herd of over 20 missing tags, I think it's in that cross compliance, and it's a big issue for someone with a large number of cattle. I'm told people have been fined, experiencing very, very heavy fines in relation to that. I mean, massive amounts of money, and single tag issue is part of the partner's problem because.
You want to cover that as well?
Yes, maybe that's one issue we'd like to cover.
Yeah, it's wide and out, but that's okay. So concentrate on the changes, and are the changes EU driven or coming in from Northern Ireland Executive Departments, because it might not necessarily be DARD.
Okay.
And the cross compliance issue with a separate letter going on the issue of hedge cutting.
Is that okay? Okay. We're going to
Be changed from reservoirs. Be changed from reservoirs.
Then item 10, Joint Cap Paper Update and UK and Ireland Registers. I refer members to updated briefing paper and cap at page 120 to 210. Paper updates the November 2013 version. How the cap reform package has been finalised. The paper sets out the main implementation decisions for the UK and Ireland. The research paper highlights where the approaches to cap have varied across the various areas, and they are consistent with an overview of stakeholder reactions to cap reform. Members content to note. Okay. Agenda item 11, correspondence. Can refer members to the correspondence received at page 215 to 226. For members content to action, correspondence is suggested on the index sheet at page 214. Okay. Agenda item 12.
What's that about poisoning from sycamore trees?
See, this...
Do we know?
You read it then?
I see it there. Is it something that happens?
Yeah, it is. It's happening, and the correspondence there is to forward to DARD to respond to it, because it's not actually a committee responsibility to respond to it. What is happening is that the seed from the sycamore tree is poisonous to horses and can cause that disease that's mentioned there.
Didn't realise that lately.
And this season, because it's been good spring, summer and autumn, there's apparently much more sycamore seed around than normal, so there's been more incidences of
Those
this.
people who keep horses, are they not aware? Maybe they're not aware. It's something he's raised. I'd
say something quite rare.
They're windborne. You know those wee seeds that have, they're windborne. So I suppose they can come from distances.
What's your horses now?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not for the committee to respond to how this is dealt with. It's for DARD too. So that's just send it on to them. Okay.
Agenda item 12, forward work programme. Can I refer members to the forward work programme on page 228 to 231? Can I ask you to note that financial scrutiny training on the budget has been organised for Tuesday the 18th of November 2014 during the meeting. Can I refer members to the correspondence at page 18 to 30, table papers from the Finance and Personnel Committee. This details the timeline for the budget scrutiny alongside a research briefing note on lines of questioning. Can I seek agreement to forward the research paper to the department to ask for a response to part B? Okay. Can I seek agreement for the forward work programme? Agenda item 13, any other business? Is there any other business? Agenda item 14, date and time of next meeting. Next meeting of the Committee of Agriculture and Rural Development will take place on Tuesday the 18th of November.